Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm Alan Parry and I'm the author of How to Remove Trauma Response, a memory reconsolidation guidebook for therapists and coaches. Now, what I'm going to look at today in this particular episode of the podcast is a mistake that people often make when they're looking at deciding on a therapy approach. Now, this podcast is, for two kinds of people, I suppose. First, therapists and practitioners who are interested in creating transformational outcomes for the people that you work with, but also for people who might be therapists or coaches, but may not be, who are looking really to explore this topic because they feel as though it's important for their own personal development. And you're looking really to try and get some sense of how you can achieve transformation in your life rather than just managing the problems that are coming up for you. Now, both of those groups will struggle with this same issue, will be making the same mistakes around this question of how do you choose a therapy approach? Now, if you're looking at this for your own personal development, then you'll be looking to choose a therapy approach in order to try and deliver that transformation. You'll be thinking, well, I want this change in my life. So which approach out there do I actually go with in terms of my own therapist? And that's particularly the case if you're the kind of person who's really well read on this stuff. I find that certainly this was true for me as well, but I find that a lot of people who are striving for some sort of transformation are really well read in terms of knowing a lot about various therapy approaches. And so the question comes about, like, how do I actually choose one? What's the best approach for me? And so typically what will happen is there'll be a whole load of approaches that you know about or that you'll be learning about or will be on your horizon, and you're looking to choose one for you. And what I'm going to be looking at here is, from your point of view, the mistakes that people make and the misconceptions that people have when we do that. But the other group, like I say, are therapists and practitioners and coaches. And the great thing about practitioners is that we're always wanting to be better. We're always wanting to be able to facilitate really effective transformational change. And so from a different angle, we have the same question. What is it we should be learning next? What is the therapy approach? What are the methodologies that we need to be exploring and learning and becoming really good at? What is it that we need to choose in order to become the best practitioner that we could possibly be? And so that group too has very, very similar misconceptions and mistakes that we'll make when it comes to how to actually choose a therapy approach. So by the end of this podcast episode, what I hope both of those groups have is a really strong sense of how to make those choices and how to make those choices well. So not from a sense of being tied into the mistakes that people typically make, but we'll have a clearer understanding of what it is you need to be looking for in order to get the therapy approach that best suits you and is most likely to deliver that transformation that you're looking for, either for yourself or, if you are a practitioner, for the people that you work with. Now, in order to help guide you through the mistakes that people often make, and so you get to that point of having a much clearer and more sound understanding of how to make these choices, I'm going to be looking at three things. The first thing, which I think is the first mistake, is to be overly fixated on the mode of transport. So I'm going to use this transport and journey analogy. And so the first mistake I want to look at in a moment is to be overly fixated on the mode of transport. The second mistake is to go with something that has a set of directions like travel directions, rather than going with something that has a more agile, interactive roadmap. And then the final thing I want to look at is the destination, because after all, the destination is where we want to end up. And while I'm talking about the other two things, I'll be talking a little bit about the destination as well. So let's look at that first one. I think the first mistake that people make, whether we're looking to try and find the right therapy for us and our own personal growth, whether we're looking for the right therapy approach for ourselves as practitioners, like what do we learn next? I think the big mistake and misconception that we make is that we overly fixate on the mode of transport. So the mode of transport in this sense would be the therapy approach itself. So there are lots of therapies out there. You know, there's CBT, there's EMDR, there's IFS, there's TA, there's ACT. There's tons and tons, there's hundreds in fact, of different therapy models, different therapy approaches. And what often happens is that, let's say you're a practitioner and you're noticing that there's maybe a client or two that you're struggling with. And so you go and talk to other practitioners and think, well, how do I kind of get over this bridge? How do I ensure that this weakness that I've got can be fixed, and I can learn something that is going to fix that blind spot, if you like, if you think of that car analogy. And someone will say, oh, well, what would be great for this? And they'll suggest a therapy model. And so what they'll say to you is something like, well, I used to have that problem as well, but I started using this therapy approach and it's really helped. In a very similar way, whenever you're looking to get a result in your own life, you might be reading or listening to podcasts or talking to people and they'll say, oh, well, I had a problem and I want to create a change, and the thing that worked for me is, and then they'll name a therapy model as well. So whether you're looking at this for yourself or whether you're looking at this as something to learn as a practitioner, you're both facing this same issue where you're hearing back from people that the answer to the difficulty that you face, the answer to getting to the transformation that you want, is this particular mode of transport, this particular therapy model. Now, the problem with this is it's a little bit like, I don't know, let's say you've always wanted to go to London and you've never been to London and you've tried different ways of getting to London and you've never gotten there. And then you meet someone and they say, oh, I had a lovely weekend. I've just been to London. And you're like, oh, wow, London. I've always wanted to go to London. I've never quite figured out how to get there. And they say, well, let me sort this out for you because I'll tell you how I got there. I got the train. And you're like, brilliant. The train is the answer. And so you go to a railway station and you see a train and you think, that is my ticket to London. And so you jump on the train and you end up in Aberdeen. So you've jumped on this thing that people say, oh, well, the train is the answer. But in actual fact, the driver of the train has been going to a completely different destination. And so we'll talk about destinations a little bit later on, why I think that's really important. But you can see the analogy here. Someone has managed to get to London and they took the train. And so what happens is we can then overly fixate on the mode of transport. And next thing you know, we think the train is the answer. A particular therapy approach is the answer. But in fact, what made all the difference wasn't so much that it was that you were on a train. What made a difference is that you were on a train that was being driven in such a way that it was going to take you to London. That the important aspect, as we'll look at later, wasn't so much the mode of transport, but where that mode of transport was taking the person in that particular instance. Because you can use a particular therapy approach, but if it's not taking you to the destination that you need it to go in, and again, I'll talk about what that destination needs to be at the end of the podcast, but if it's not taking you to that destination, it's kind of pointless. It's the same, someone might say, oh, well, I just got in the car and drove, and you think, oh, well, I've got a car. Thank goodness that's the answer. That's how I go to London. And yet you might end up in an entirely different place. When you think about it, most of the time you get in the car and drive, you don't end up in London. And so there's something which is more important than the mere mode of transport. And this is exactly true as well of a therapy modality, a therapy approach. Now, the second mistake that we make is that we get focused on a set of travel directions rather than being in a place of agility where we're having some sort of interactive roadmap. So what this reminds me of is when I first started my work in life, I was 21 and I'd very recently learned how to drive a car. But unfortunately, in my job at the time, what I was doing, I was traveling all over the place to places I'd never visited before. And it was before the days of, computerization and technical help for these things. And so what would happen is I'd go, okay, I'm in Blackburn tomorrow. So I'd have to go to Blackburn in Lancashire, and I'd have to go to a particular place. And so I would plan out my journey with a set of directions, and I'd write them down. Step 1, turn right here. Step 2, turn left. Step 3, when you get to this motorway, do this. And I'd go through until I got to the end. What would invariably happen is I'd take a wrong turning. And the moment that I took a wrong turning, guess what I was? I was stuck. I was stuck in the middle of nowhere, and I was lost, and I didn't know what to do next. I was reliant on this set of specific steps, these specific travel directions. One of the things that I don't like about many modalities is that they are protocols. And so what they basically tell the therapist to do, and that might be you if you then learn that approach, or it might be your therapist if you follow that approach. But because they're very protocol heavy, they will often have a series of steps. And then what happens if you don't particularly like, or your client doesn't particularly like a step, or the step doesn't fit in any way? The practitioner is completely lost. If you're the practitioner, you'll be completely lost, because a little bit like me with my travel directions, I know what the next step should be, but we've taken a different turning. And what the heck do we do now? And so this is another mistake, I think, in terms of thinking about therapy and thinking about what's going to be effective, is that when we lean into these modes of transport, these therapy approaches, they're often very heavily protocolized. Do this, do that, do that. Now do the next thing. And of course, as a famous boxer once said, every plan falls apart the moment you're punched in the face. And so once the rubber hits the road, if you like, those protocols can be worthless, and even worse than worthless, because they then get in our way and we're now just like, well, I don't know what to do now. It's taken a different turning and I'm lost. And of course, when you're working with someone, you don't want your therapist to be lost. And if you are a practitioner, you don't want to be lost while you're working with someone simply because they've taken a different turning. I remember somebody I know went to see a therapist last year, and there was a certain point in the directions, the protocol, where it just didn't fit my friend. And they said so, and the therapist was really lost at that point. What happens now if ever I need to travel to Blackburn in Lancashire is I have an interactive roadmap. It's called a sat-nav. And if I take a wrong turn, it doesn't matter because it will redirect me because I've got this interactive roadmap. I'm not just focused on you have to take this step and you have to take that step, you have to take the other step. If I take a wrong turning, fine. And I often do take a wrong turning. And guess what? I'm able, through the use of that roadmap, to get back on track. And so when I'm teaching inside of the coaching academy for the practitioners who learn from me, I'm always talking about the importance of having a roadmap rather than a specific protocol. And sometimes people say, is there a protocol to this? Can we write this down in steps? And I always advise people not to do that. I always advise people to keep it from a roadmap point of view, because then if the client wants something different, you'll still be able to know where you're headed to in a way that you simply won't if you've got these very fixed protocol steps. So they're the first two things. They're the first two big mistakes. The first one is getting overly fixated on the mode of transport, the therapy model. And the second one is following protocols which keep you really rigid and work fine, I suppose, if everything goes to plan, but things very rarely go to plan. It's a dance therapy, isn't it? It's a very improvisational thing. And so what you really need is something that is going to keep you on track, even when things don't go according to plan strictly. So if we shouldn't be fixating on protocols and these firm sort of step-by-step things, and if we shouldn't be focusing on a mode of transport, what is it that we should be looking at? And the thing that I think is most important to be focused on is not so much the mode of transport, certainly not a protocol which keeps you very rigid and keeps you very lost when it goes off-piste. What I think we need to be focused on is the destination. Because after all, a train is fine as long as it's going to your destination. A bus is fine as long as it's going to your destination. Now, when somebody drives a bus, what will happen is that someone who's driving a bus to Aberdeen and someone who's driving a bus to London, if you focus on the what of what they're doing, it looks very similar, doesn't it? Oh, I see. So you sit behind a wheel and you steer the steering wheel. You'll turn it left, you'll turn it right, you'll keep it straight. At certain points, you'll put your foot on the clutch and you'll change gear. And someone who's driving that bus to London and someone who's driving that bus to Aberdeen look like they're doing the same thing. But the key differentiator that tells you that they're not quite doing the same thing is that one of them's taking you to London and the other one's taking you to Aberdeen. So where should we be going? What should we be looking for when we're looking for support for our own personal development? What should we be looking for as practitioners when we're looking to add to our skill set? What should our focus be? And in my view, it shouldn't be thinking about, well, what is the therapy approach? And it shouldn't be, what are the protocol steps? It should be, what is the destination? Now, the destination which is most optimal, I think, for the vast majority of cases that we work with, which deal with emotional learnings, is memory reconsolidation. Now, memory reconsolidation is the right destination because it is a biological mechanism that everybody's brain has, which gives it the capability of overwriting old emotional learnings and trauma responses. So we all have this capacity to make these transformational changes. So the things that are the predictions, if you like, the old predictions, the old learnings, which are still running our lives today, can actually be updated and overwritten. Now, the brain doesn't do this super easily. It wants a certain amount of steps for it to trigger that, a little bit like a combination safe does. But nonetheless, it has that capacity, and it is able and willing, when memory reconsolidation is triggered, to update an old prediction, to update an old trauma response. And what happens then is that old prediction that is running your life and is bringing about the problems in your life is overwritten, and so no longer gets played out, no longer gets triggered in the way that it used to. And so the important thing is not what modality a practitioner uses, but are they using that modality in such a way that they can use it consistently to trigger memory reconsolidation, to trigger that biological mechanism in your brain that is going to create this override, this transformation, so that old emotional learning is simply not there or not. Because they could use their modality in that way, or they could use it in a way which doesn't trigger memory reconsolidation at all. It's like that train. You can drive a train, but the issue is not getting on a train. The issue is whether that train takes you to the destination you want to get to. And memory reconsolidation, in my view, for the vast majority of things, those things that have an old emotional learning that is driving the problem, memory reconsolidation has to be the desired destination. And so it's not so much what modality a practitioner is using, just like it's not so much whether someone is getting on a train. It's whether they're using it in such a way to get to that all-important destination of triggering memory reconsolidation. Now, the other reason why destinations are important is when we focus on a protocol, like we looked at on that second mistake. When we focus on protocols, what we're really connected to there is the steps. There's a process, and we have to follow the process. But again, those processes, those steps are only useful if they get you to the destination. But when we focus on the protocols without a real sense of how we can be agile enough, like a roadmap, to get to the destination, we just get stuck and lost. And in fact, some of those protocols won't take you to that destination, even if you follow them faithfully. Because again, the real core question is this work going to take me to the destination? Is this work going to just manage my problems, or is it going to overwrite them? Is the old emotional learning that keeps everything in place, is that going to be eradicated, or am I going to have to keep hold of that old trauma response and so have to keep managing this problem going forward? And so there are many protocols out there that you could follow very, very faithfully. But what matters isn't how faithfully you follow them, or even whether you can get back on track should things go off-piste. What matters is whether those protocols are taking you to the right destination. And so what I want to get across to you in this particular episode is that it isn't really important whether a practitioner follows a particular modality. It isn't really important whether a practitioner is really good at remembering and following a set of steps in the protocol. What's only important is whether their work is leading them to the destination of memory reconsolidation. Because let's face it, everybody's brain has the capability to take an old emotional learning and actually rewrite the brain pathway that contains. So much like overwriting an old cassette tape, you can actually do that with a brain pathway as well. And if we can do that, why would we choose any other destination? And so the key for me is the question of, is this practitioner going to lead you to a place where it triggers memory reconsolidation for you? And is the thing that you're learning, if you are a practitioner, going to show you how to get to that destination? Because knowing a modality doesn't matter. Knowing a set of protocol steps doesn't matter. The only thing that really matters is whether you fully appreciate what the brain needs in order to trigger memory reconsolidation so that old trauma responses and old learnings and old predictions can actually be removed for good. So my advice would be, what we really need to do is, instead of learning just a ton of modalities and protocols and it all becomes confusing and messy and we're just on that modality merry-go-round forever, what we do instead is we start with the destination in mind. What does the brain actually need to be able to trigger memory reconsolidation so that we can actually work with the brain's own biological mechanism to create transformational change and work backwards from there? What is it we need to do as practitioners to fully understand how to get to that destination, irrespective of your modality? Because whether you're on a train or whether you're driving a car or whether you're cycling or whether you're hopping backwards doesn't really matter. What matters is whether you are headed towards the right destination. It doesn't matter whether you're on a train if it's not going to London and you need to get to London. It doesn't matter if you're on a bus or a coach and it's not going to London. It doesn't matter what steps the practitioner follows if those steps are leading them to a destination that is different from the one that we need to be at. So what I teach inside of the Memory Reconsolidation Elite Coaching Academy is a very, very straightforward and simple 3-step roadmap so that you fully understand at each step of that journey what you need to be doing as a practitioner in order to be getting to that correct destination. Now, if you want to learn more about memory reconsolidation, you can find out about the Coaching Academy. It's at freshTherapist.com/coaching. If you're wanting to just find out some of the free stuff that I have and explore it a little more, you can go to freshtherapists.com, and that's plural, by the way, freshtherapists.com. And if you're listening to this and thinking, this makes a lot of sense in terms of your own personal journey, and so rather than thinking about therapy models and protocols and all of these things, and you want to work with someone who knows how to help you get to that point of memory reconsolidation for yourself, then you might consider working with me, and you can find out more about that at alanparry.com. Now, Alan is spelled the Welsh way, so it's A-L-U-N, so that's alanparry.com. So I hope that's helped. We've gone through 3 different things. First of all, the big mistake is to focus on the mode of transport, to focus on the modality, the therapy approach. Second, to get overly fixated on the steps, on the directions that we write down, the protocol, if you like. But thirdly, the all-important distinguisher about whether any of those is going to bring the right result for you is whether it is fixed on the right destination. And if your train is, bingo, you're going to get there. And if your way of working as a practitioner is focused on memory reconsolidation, you're going to get there. And if your practitioner who is supporting you is focused on getting to memory reconsolidation, then you'll get there too. So I hope that's been useful. I hope that's dispelled some myths, some misconceptions. I hope it's given you some clarity about how you choose the approach that's going to be right for you, whether you're working on your own goals or whether you're looking to help others. And as I say, if you want to find out more, you can either go to freshtherapists.com, that's therapist plural, or go to alanparry.com, and that's A-L-U-N. And thanks for listening, and I'll see you on the next one.